Hey guys, I just shot a video on the differences between demand and quantity demanded, which really tells you also the difference between supply and quantity supplied. In this video, guys, I'm going to tell you why economists differentiate between demand and quantity demanded. Again, this video is the why to that last video, so let's call this part 2, right? So here is the answer, which isn't going to make a lot of sense to you at first, but hopefully by the end of the video it will. The answer is this: we differentiate between the word demand and quantity demanded and supply and quantity supplied because we put two functions on our models, and those two functions are interdependent. That's right. The reason we find it necessary to differentiate between demand and quantity demanded is our models have two functions, and those two functions are interdependent. Again, that's not a true explanation. That's just the why. Let's get to the explanation part. So by the end of the video, hopefully that makes more sense. So I've got two markets, a market for good A and a market for good B, okay? And here's what we're going to say. We're going to say in this market for good A, we have an increase in production technology, an advancement, if you will, in production technology used to produce the good, I'm changing an attribute of the supplier. What that is going to cause is this supply curve to shift, and it's going to shift right, representing an increase in supply. So let's go ahead and put that right there. Supply is going to go there. Now, let me say again, because if you're new to economics, that can be confusing in and of itself. That movement from, or shift, I should say, that shift from right here to right here represents an increase in supply. Supply has shifted to the right. The quantity supplied has increased at all price points. Let me say that again. The quantity supplied, which is measured horizontally, has increased at all price points, right? So we got an increase in supply. Now, down here, this is the market for good B. We're going to say there's no relationship between these goods. Let's say in the good B market, guys, our taste and preference for good B increases, okay? Our taste and preference, the consumer's taste and preference, that's an attribute of the demander. So I'm going to shift the demand curve. I'm going to shift it to the right, representing an increase in demand. Demanders will now demand more, or the quantity they're demanding will increase at every single price point, okay? So this was an increase in demand. Now, with that said, listen to these questions right here. Are consumers going to buy more in this market? And are consumers going to buy more in this market? The answer is yes and yes. In both markets, the demanders, the consumer, is going to end up buying more. In this particular market, we're going to move from an equilibrium point that was right there to an equilibrium point that is right here. And the quantity equilibrium, the quantity exchanged, is going to increase. It was this amount, and now the quantity exchanged is going to be this amount. So it was QS equaled QD right there. That distance was where QS and QD were equal. Now QS and QD, so let me cross this out. Now QS equals QD out here. So we are absolutely buying more. In this one, we're going to move from this equilibrium point, E sub 0, to this equilibrium point, E sub 1, bring it down to my quantity axis right there. And again, just like in this top one, we bought more, we're going to end up buying more. So I already went through that QS, QD. The easy way to do it is just say QE0, QE1. So the quantity exchange or quantity equilibrium, you can say it either way, has increase. We're buying more, we're buying more. But economists want to differentiate between this and this. Why is that? Because this graph represents a supply-driven event. In this particular market, there was a fundamental attribute of the supplier that changed, and supply increased. It was a supply-driven event. Now, when supply increased, it did put downward pressure on prices, and it was that decrease in prices that got buyers to buy more. But the attributes of the buyer, their taste or preference for the good, their income, the number of buyers, their expectations about future prices, the prices of substitutes and complements in consumption, all of those things are still the same. They have not changed in this particular market. All the attributes of the demander are the same. Demand has not changed. That's right. In this graph, demand did not change. And we could easily see that graphically. We only have a single demand curve still, right? The demand curve has gone nowhere. The demand curve represents demand. It represents the relationship between P and QD. If that demand curve has not gone anywhere, demand has not changed, but we are buying more. What are we doing? Well, the quantity we're demanding is increasing, right? We went from E sub 0 to E1. The quantity we're demanding is increasing. Why? Because the price went down. But why did the price go down? Because a fundamental attribute of the supplier changed. That advancement in production technology, which called supply, is a shift to the right. Again, supply-driven event. So we don't want to say demand change, because to an economist, there's, oh, okay, so something fundamental about the demand or change. No, nothing fundamental about the demand or change. Something fundamental about the suppliers changed in this particular graph. In this graph, yes, something fundamental about the demander changed. The demanders are now willing to buy more at every single price point. Why? Because their taste or preference for good B has increased. Demand itself has shifted right. This is a demand-driven event. So our language for this one is demand increased. Oh, an attribute of the demander changed. Okay, now demanders will buy more at every price point, and that's what's driving this market change. Got it. Here, supply-driven event. All it was an increase in the quantity demanded. Demand didn't change. It was just an increase in quantity demanded. Demand itself didn't change. No attribute of the demanders, or the attributes of the demanders did not change. It was just that the price went down, so they're buying more. Now, to finish this off, stay with me, take a look at this. Let's imagine that in both graphs, the price returned to its original price. So here's what happened. This was the original price. Supply increase, that drove the price down. We went to here. Let's imagine for a second that we went back to the original price. I'm going to make it really simple. I'm going to say just by government decree, okay? So price here, we go back to the original price. Same thing over here, okay? We're going to put P sub 0 and P sub 1, okay? Here we went from P0 to P1, right? The price increased, but now, let's say by government decree, we go back to the original price, okay? So if we were to return to the original price, would we buy the same amount as we used to in this particular market, this market for good A? If we go back to the original price, would we buy the same amount as we used to? The answer is absolutely, because demand has not changed. If the price went back to the original price, we would, our quantity demanded would go from here to there. It would go back to its original amount, okay? Why? Because again, demand did not change. In this particular situation, guys, if price goes back to its original amount, if price was to go back to its original amount, guess what? We would buy more than we used to buy at that original price. How much did we buy at the original price? That horizontal distance right there. That's how much we were buying at the original price when that was the demand curve that was present in society. But now demand has shifted to the right. This curve doesn't even exist anymore, right? So if we go back to the original price, now the quantity demanded is quite a bit more. If we were to go back to the original price, we would demand more than we used to. Why? Because again, demand changed in this particular graph. The difference between demand and quantity demanded, and now you know why we think it's so important that you understand the two, because it's a communication thing. Oh, this was a supply-driven event. And by the way, that supply-driven event led to the price going down. This was a demand-driven event, which led to the price going up. Yes, in both situations, we bought more, but for very different reasons. I hope that made sense to you. We'll see you in the next video.